Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our upcoming Applicant Retreat presentation. During this presentation, we're going to be going over the VMCAS application for those that are applying to veterinary school during the 2021 cycle, which is this year. Before we jump into what the components of the application, we wanted to go over a brief application and interview timeline, just so you know what things will look like in a few months. So in June through September, you can start submitting your application if you have it completed. And during that time, the application will be verified and you will start to complete your secondary applications. In October, you'll be waiting to hear back about interviews. Your applications will be turned in. You'll be in school potentially or starting your gap year. But in October, we do have our pre-health conference that you can attend if you are interested. In November, you'll start hearing back about interviews. Some schools do start interviewing during that time period. In December, the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine will be conducting their interviews. That's traditionally the time when they do them. In January, you'll continue to be doing some interviews depending on what schools you apply to. You'll actually start hearing back about acceptances or waitlist for the schools that either didn't have interviews or the schools that you have already interviewed for. Same thing for February, you'll continue to do interviews, hear about acceptances and wait lists, and basically you'll hear back about acceptances up until April and maybe even May, depending on when the wait list announcements are made for each school. And then May through June, that's when you'll start worrying about financial aid for the specific school you committed to and will be attending. You'll start finding housing and you'll be preparing to move to whichever school you will be attending in the fall. And then July through August of that year, you'll actually be physically moving to that location, and you'll be starting vet school. Most vet schools do start in August, at least in the US, since they are semester schools. All right, so for this presentation, this is the general outline of what we're going to do. It's based on how the sections VMCAS actually has. So first, we're going to go over general information about the application and what the application even is, what VMCAS is, for those of you who haven't looked into it yet. And then we'll actually go in through the sections, which are personal information, academic history, supporting information, and program materials. All right, some general information about what VMCAS is. The VMCAS is the centralized application service used by most U.S. veterinary schools. The only exceptions, at least in the US, are Texas A&M and Texas Tech. They have their own individual application, and if you're interested in applying to those schools, they outline the application process in their admissions pages and their prerequisite pages very well. And besides US veterinary schools, there are a couple international schools that are accredited by the AAVMA that also use VMCAS. So keep an eye out to see which schools use VMCAS. It opens in January, so it's already open. You can actually go ahead and go in there and make your account, see what the sections look like, and actually start filling in things. And it is typically due in September, so this year it's due September 15th. But even though it is due in September, we strongly recommend everyone submit their application by August 15th. And in the next slide, we'll talk a little bit more about why we recommend you submit a month early. And then you can't select your program, so your schools that you want to apply to and send your application to, until May 12th. But you can essentially do almost the entire application before May 12th and then just pick the schools and complete secondaries. All right, so here's why we recommend everyone turn in their application a month early. So when you are doing your academic history portion of the application, you have to input all your courses exactly as they appear on your transcript. And since you have to manually put in all your classes and send in your transcript, VMCAS will actually verify that everything is complete and correct. And if you submit a month early, your application will be verified earlier, and say you submit and there's a mistake that you accidentally made, If they verify it early, they actually will send your application back, let you know what you need to fix, and you can fix it and turn it in before the application deadline. If you submit on the deadline and make a mistake, VMCAS may just take your application and not consider it in this year's pool because it has a mistake. So a month early is always the way to go. And if you have any questions about that, we are available to answer those questions. All right. So for the academic history portion, they're gonna ask you about the high school and colleges you attended. It's pretty straightforward. You just put in the information like when you attended and what year you graduated or what year you think you will be graduating. And official transcripts have to be sent to VMCAS, and they have to be sent straight from the school. So you're not going to be getting an official transcript and then sending it to the school. When you go in and order your transcripts, you will be ordering it to be sent directly to VMCAS. UCD sends electric transcripts, so you can just do the form online. Other schools may not do electronic transcripts. They may have to mail it out. And in that case, you would just have to fill out the paperwork for that. An example is if you went to a community college before UC Davis or another four-year university and they don't do electronic transcripts, you need to contact those schools and ask them how you can send them. You can do this ahead of time. You don't need to wait until your spring grades are posted to submit your VMCAS transcript. You can just simply select hold for spring grades when you order the transcript, and they'll just send it once spring quarter grades are inputted. And on the next slide, this is what it looks like on VMCAS. They actually make it quite simple for you to order your transcripts. You'll put in the university you attended. So for example, here UC Davis is on there, the dates you are attending. So if you are still attending, you'd put still attending. You explain what quarter, if it's quarter semester system, and then when you expect to earn your bachelor's degree. And so in this case, they had already received the transcript because this is from my old application. But essentially, when you're doing it, you would click order right here next to where it says that. And then this will pop up. So UC Davis uses credential solutions. So you would click on that one and it'll send you directly to the website. And it'll give you clear instructions on how to order it. So for example, when you're ordering it, when you're selecting the recipient, you would select VMCAS Veterinary Medical College, application service, transcript processing, and then you would make sure to include your ID number. So this ID number is different for everybody. So don't put this one. You just copy it. It even gives you a copy link, and just put that all in, and it should be pretty straightforward. If you have any trouble with this, you can always come to HPA, either make an appointment with one of the advisors or come to drop-in hours, and we can help you get this sorted. All right, so one of the biggest things I see applicants making mistakes on is the transcript entry. So you actually have to manually input all of your classes for every school you've gone to. And you need to enter it exactly as it appears on your official transcript. So for example, a common class that many students take is Animal Science 1, and it's denoted as ANS 1 on your unofficial transcript or on your OASIS. However, on your official transcript, it is actually labeled as ANSCI 001. So you have to input it with the correct code. And it's essentially the case for all courses, and I'll show you on the next slide an example of the difference between unofficial and an official transcript. And then transcripts must be verified, so ensure you submit early, again, before the deadline, because if, say, you accidentally put ANS 1 instead of ANSCI 001, they can actually just send you back the application, tell you you inputted something incorrectly in your transcript entry, and you can quickly just fix that before submitting again. All right, so here is an example of an unofficial transcript, or on your OASIS, it'll look like this as well, versus an official transcript. This is the same quarter, spring quarter 2016, spring quarter 2016, and these are the exact same classes. But notice how here it says ANS 002, and here it is ANSCI 002. So you want to input it like this. And notice how it's the same thing for all of them. Like chem is different and biz is different. It's not biz, it's biological sciences. So what I usually recommend to people is just order an official transcript for yourself and then use that to input all your courses. That's usually the best way to go, and it's free to order a transcript for yourself. And you can do it the same way, same method as when you order it for VMCAS, except that the recipient would be yourself in that case. And again, if you have any questions about transcript entry, feel free to ask any of the advisors at HPA. They can help you out. All right, the next portion of the academic history is actually the standardized tests. And in the case of vet med, standardized tests typically means the GRE. So you will enter your scores for each of the sections, which are written, verbal, and quantitative. And besides entering your scores manually for each section, you're also going to have to send your official GRE scores to each school individually. So unlike the transcript, you're sending this to the schools individually. You're not just sending it to VMCAS. One thing I like to remind students is that you can send your GRE scores to up to 4 schools for free. The only caveat to that is that you have to send them right after you take the test. So the day you're taking the test, you have to select the schools you want to send your scores to. And all school scores need to be reported. So if you take it 3 times, you need to send all 3 scores. Most schools will just take the best score anyway, so you don't need to worry about that. Just every time you go to this take a test, take the GRE, just submit to the school to at least 4 schools that you for sure think you're going to be applying to, or even are considering applying to. And you can find the school test codes for submitting your scores on the school's website or on the VMCAS website. And I believe that when you take the GRE, they also give you a booklet with some of the schools. And then if you don't send, say you already took the GRE and you didn't send it to any schools, then just go to the ETS website and they have instructions on there on how to send your scores to each school. The only thing is that when you send it after, you do have to pay for it. And then not all schools need a GRE score, so don't be alarmed if you don't see a school listed that you're planning on applying to. They might not require the GRE, so I would double check on their website to see if that's a requirement or not. And if it's not, then you don't need to worry about sending a score because they're not going to look at it. All right, so moving on to the personal information section, most of the components of this section are very straightforward. It'll be things like your name, like your parents' information. Are you first generation? Did you like some other information like did you ever get into did you ever have a felony, etc. And it's just information that you put in similar to what you did for the UC application. Besides that, straightforward information, just biographical things about you, this is also where they give you an opportunity to explain something not listed somewhere else in the app. So it's like a little personal statement where you have a certain number of characters to explain things. Common things that are explained in that little section is if you're missing parent information, you can explain why. If you took a year off or you deferred while you were in undergrad or when you were in community college, you can explain why you had that interruption in your studies, just so that they're aware of what happened in that case if you're comfortable sharing, or any hard circumstances that you want them to be aware of. So for example, if you had a death in your family during your second year and that quarter your grades suffered, you might explain that in that section, just because you might want to tell them like, hey, I know this doesn't look great, but there's a reason for it. This is also the section where if you wanted to, you could explain the impact COVID-19 had on you. You wouldn't, people typically ask me where they should talk about this if they want to explain something. And sometimes they want to do it in their personal statement, and you shouldn't do that in your personal statement. If you wanted to talk about it, this is a section where you can talk about it. The only thing I tell people is if you're going to talk about why you had so little experience, for example, I wouldn't explain that, because a lot of people had the same experience where they couldn't get any in-person veterinary hours or animal experience hours because of the pandemic. That they're not going to dock you on if you have the most minimum hours because of the pandemic. They're aware that this happened. So I wouldn't be worried about explaining that. But for example, if you went through some financial hardship, or if someone in your family passed away due to COVID, et cetera, things like that, you can explain it here, and that'd be a really good place to talk about it. And then after that, this is where your personal statement comes in. So this year they changed the personal statement. It used to be 3 questions, so it's 3 prompts. And they changed that to 1 prompt, and you have 3,000 characters, including spaces, for your entire personal statement. Which sounds daunting. That's about a page of writing for you to answer the prompt. And then before we go into the prompt and some of our recommendations on how to go about writing the personal statement, one of the big things you recommend is to type your personal statement in a separate Word document or in a Google document, since VMCAS may time out. And if you are doing your entire essay on there, it might get erased. So always use a separate Word document when doing your personal statement, and then just when it's completed, just paste it in to VMCAS. All right. So I feel like this is a big question for everyone. This is like one of the most daunting things for me when I was doing my personal statement. Is I don't think I'm a good writer, so I was very scared about what to do when writing my personal statement. So this year, the prompt mainly focuses on why do you want to be a vet. There's a little more to the prompt, and there's some recommendations on the VMCAS application. So I definitely recommend you go to the application and actually look at the exact prompt and what what their suggestions are to get you started. But essentially, this is what the prompt is why do you want to be a vet? So since you only have 3,000 characters to answer this very broad question, this is our recommended structure. So usually when people hear this question, they gravitate towards the journey story, where right away they start talking about how they arrived to the decision to pursue veterinary medicine in the first place. It's more of a history story. For example, maybe you saved a frog when you were 5 years old and you nursed it back to health, and then you released it, and that made you realize that you really wanted to care for animals, and thus you wanted to be a veterinarian, and now you're in college and you're still pursuing that dream. And usually people will say have their story, and then it'll be followed by some achievements like I did this, this, and this. Since you only have 3,000 characters, we want to encourage people to think about it more in the sense of the value you bring to the profession. So, and not only to the profession, the value you bring to the school, and why they should take you. And because it is 3,000 characters, a good structure to go on is that basic 3-paragraph structure. So the first paragraph we think should be your intro. So this can be the story that creates context and leads to the thesis of why you want to do this, why you want to be a veterinarian. So here you can share some background, even a story to build context for how you came to be someone who wants to be a vet in the first place. So you can have that story of when you were younger and you were in the woods exploring with the animals, etc. This is a good place to where you can put it, but the paragraph should end with a clear thesis statement telling the person reading, aka the admissions board, what you want to do, at least at this point in your life. So I know Not everyone knows what kind of vet they want to be or like what they want to do in 5 years besides being a veterinarian, and that's fine. But you should have an idea of, for example, what communities you want to work with. Do you want to work in a rural area or in a city? Um, those two are very different, and you might know at this point what you're interested in. Um, Maybe you know that you like if you want to work with small animals versus large animals, that's a pretty big difference, and that can tell them a lot about where you see yourself in the profession. If you do know a specialty or very like what specific type of veterinarian you want to be, then mention it. If you want to be a cardiologist, this is your chance to mention it. Um, so those are all things where like you don't need to exactly say, I want to own a 2 doctor practice in Pennsylvania that is 2 hours away from the city. Like you don't need to do that. But have like give them an idea of what you want to do with your career. Um, Another thing is like when you think about the communities you want to work with, for example, if you speak a second language, then you might be interested in working with communities that speak your language. And then you can serve them because you have that skill set. But whatever it is that you want to do with your career, mention it here. And whatever it is that you mention here, you're not like the admissions board isn't going to be, oh, you picked this, you're stuck with this forever. This is what you're going to be doing. Like you can mention something in your personal statement and then change your mind like 3 years into vet school. That's fine. This isn't like a contract or anything. All right. So you have your story that creates context and you have your thesis about why you want to do this. In your second paragraph, here's where you want to highlight your competencies and the attributes that you have through your experiences. So, what are some of the competencies you need to succeed in your goal for your future? So, some of the common competencies that everybody thinks about when it comes to veterinary medicine are communication, professionalism, and leadership. And including these competencies is fine, but also consider that a lot of people will be talking about these competencies in their personal statement. So instead of just focusing on general communication and professionalism, try to make your competencies a little more specific to your career goal. For example, if you want to target the competency of public speaking and marketing, sorry, for example, if you want to work with a specific community about owning backyard chickens and teaching them about the proper care, etc., you'd want to talk about the competencies of public speaking and marketing because these are a little more specific. They're both talking about communication, but they're a little more specific. So in this case, you'd want to make sure you include any college experience, any class projects, etc., where you demonstrate these competencies. So, for example, with marketing, you can say, in my marketing class, we had to come up with a pitch and a brochure to talk about X, Y, and Z. That's a really good like experience that mentions that you've done this before, so you have this competency and you're aware of what it takes to be successful with it. And then make sure you connect all your competencies with experiences. You don't just want to say, I'm really good at public speaking. You want to say, I have been in debate team for 5 years. Thus, I have a lot of experience in public speaking and comfortable doing so. And then all these things should explain, you should explain why it's relevant to being a veterinary student and being a veterinarian. Don't just leave it up in the air and leave it up to the reader to guess. Like, talk about it. Be specific. And usually, again, it's only 3,000 characters. So, like 2 to 3 experiences. 3 might be pushing it, but 2 to 3 experiences is what you're aiming for. Just simply because your character count is limited. So, really think about the competencies and the experiences you want to talk about in this paragraph. Okay. Then once you have all that completed, you come to your conclusion paragraph. So in this conclusion paragraph, you want to open with a clear statement about the value you bring based on the attributes and experiences you talked about in the previous paragraph. Share your goals here. So everything should come together and that clear statement should be very strong. because this is what you're trying to tell them. You're trying to tell them, like, I am a valuable asset to your school, and this is why you should accept me. So, for example, a statement that says, I can solve this problem, X, Y, and Z, because X, Y, and Z. And then once you have that clear statement, you can zoom out. You can zoom out of that specific and just state long-term goals that you have. And basically just, you're in this paragraph, you're selling yourself to the school. So bring everything together and tell them why you are an asset and why you are valuable to their school. So this is just a suggested structure. Again, if you have any questions about the structure, or if you don't like the structure and want it to be different, HPA is always open to helping with personal statements, especially the staff advisors. They have seen many, many personal statements throughout their career, so they can really help you get it to where you want it to be. And then just in general, when you do start writing your personal statement, during your first draft, don't worry too much about the word count. Let the content flow, because it is the first time you're writing it. So sometimes just writing things will help you figure out what you really want to talk about. And then once you have your first draft, read it over and then, get it to where you want it to be. And then, yeah, like I said, use your resources. Have people read your essays multiple times. You yourself read it multiple times. Edit it until you have it to where you want it to be. Again, a main source of help would be the HPA drop-in hours, which this quarter, at least for spring quarter, are going to be Monday through Thursday. Monday and Wednesday are 1 to 2 p.m. and then Tuesday and Thursday are 2 to 3 p.m. And you can find all these hours on the HPA events website. All right. So you've started your personal statement. You might have completed it. Another part of the application is the letters of recommendation. So the letter of recommendation will be sent directly from your letter writers to VMCAS. So what will happen is you will put in your recommender's information into VMCAS. VMCAS will then send an email to the letter writer giving them instructions on how to submit the letter, and then they will directly send it to VMCAS. They're not going to be sending it to you, and you should waive your rights to read the recommendation on VMCAS. You shouldn't be looking at it on VMCAS at least. And then for veterinary school, you are required to have a minimum of 3 recommendation letters. So one has to be from a veterinarian. That's the rule. One has to be a vet. The second one, we usually recommend it be an academic source. Not all the schools have this as a requirement, but enough do that we just suggest you have an academic source. So that typically is a professor that you took a class with. And then the other one can be who you want it to be. It can be someone you did research with. It could be one of your supervisors at your job. It could be another veterinarian. It could be another professor, etc. It's kind of up to you at that point. The big no-no is don't have family members or friends write these. These should all be non-family members or friends. And again, your recommendations letters and who you ask depends on what your specific school that you're applying to wants. So make sure you go onto their websites and check what their requirements are. Don't assume every school has the same requirement, because they don't. It's always best to be safe than sorry, and it takes seconds to go on the admissions page and look at what your school wants. And then just some general reminders, because I know asking for letters of recommendation can be nerve-wracking and it's scary, but at least people are expecting you to ask for recommendation letters. You're not being a burden by asking for letters. For example, veterinarians know that, they were once in your spot. They know that you need recommendation letters to apply to vet school. And just like they had to ask people for letters of recommendation, they know they're going to be asked one day. So don't be embarrassed. They expect it. They're not going to be mad about it or anything. Same thing with professors. They might even also expect students to ask them for letters of recommendation. Um, they know students need them, and most of them are more than happy to write a recommendation letter for students that either were in their class or who worked with them. Um, and then what I like to tell people is the worst thing that will happen is if someone doesn't want to write you a letter of recommendation, they'll just say no. Um, and you just find someone else. It's not that big of a deal. There's a lot of people, you've taken so many classes in undergrad that you have a wealth of people to ask for. And if you do have a personal relationship with the person you're asking for a letter of recommendation, they most likely are going to say yes. So again, don't be shy, ask for the letters. All right. So some more general tips on how to ask for the letter of recommendation. So we suggest that you start, at least when it comes to professors, is start with the faculty in classes you were engaged in. So you went to office hours, or you might have asked a lot of questions during lecture. You might like classes, for example, with online learning, classes where you had your camera on, and you participated in the chat when the professor asked questions. Or if your class had a discussion section and it was a smaller group with the professor and you actually, participated with the discussion, these are good places to start, because more than likely the faculty will remember you for more than just, oh yes, they sat in my class and they got this grade. They'll have more to say about you if you were engaged. And then a big myth that I hear is that you have to have an A to ask a professor for a letter of recommendation, and that's not true. You don't necessarily need an A for them to write you a good letter of recommendation. There are a few professors that, of course, have their requirements, and they might require that you have an A in their class to get a letter of recommendation for them. But if that's the case, then that isn't the letter you want anyways. So you just move on to the next one. But if you improved in their class, like you started off with a C and then ended up with a B, then you showed improvement. Then you might have, like, if you had asked them for help and worked with them to improve your grade, then that's someone you were engaged with, even though you didn't have an A, and they might be able to give you a really good letter of recommendation. But even if you were very engaged, depending on when you took the class, the professor, especially if it's a big, like a 500 person class, might not exactly remember you if it's like a quarter or two later, which is fine. The only thing is that when you are asking for the letter, make sure you introduce yourself and remind them of who you are before asking them for the letter. Sometimes professors just need a refresher of who you are. And in addition to that, don't be afraid to let them know give them ideas of what you want them to say about you in the recommendation letter. So for example, a common thing that we recommend to people is to create a PDF packet that contains your resume, your transcript, and your personal statement. It could even be the first draft. And then give this to the professor when asking for your letter of recommendation. That way they can get to know you and see what you did outside of their class, because they really only might know you in the scenario of being in a class and taking tests, etc. And this gives them an idea of more of what you had on your plate while you were taking the class and other things you are participating in. So highly recommend that. But in addition to this PDF packet, write them a cover letter that outlines the experience you had in their class and what you think they could say about you in the letter. So, for example, you could say, "Dear Dr. So-and-so, you probably don't remember me, but I took your Biz 2C class in fall of 2020. I initially really struggled with the content, but after working with you and maybe the TA you worked with, I was able to really improve. I ended up increasing my grade from a D to a B plus. Of all my faculty, I believe you are the best person to comment on my ability to take direction, to handle difficult material, and to improve academically. Would you be willing to support my application to vet school with a letter of recommendation? So this could be your cover letter, and this could also be the email you send to them. Obviously, it's not going to be exactly like this, but that's just to give you an idea of what you can say. Um, and if you notice, that cover letter or that example gives evidence to the professor of why they should write you a letter. So, for example, in that one, it was because you worked with them and you really improved in their class after taking their advice. Um, and then you state kind of an idea of what you want them to talk about. So, for example, in that example, is you want them to talk about your ability to handle difficult material and to improve academically and to take direction. Um, and if you need any help with, how to frame your cover letter or to come up with your packet, or how to like draft the email to somebody, this could be the vet or the professor or anybody else, then again, use your resources. HPA can help you with that. If you don't have a resume and you want help with, like, making your resume, then the ICC is an excellent source for you. You can go and they can help you make that resume really nice before you send it off to those who you want to recommend you. You want to appear very professional when you're asking for these letters of recommendation, so you'll make sure everything looks nice and cohesive. Then the last tip is to ask multiple faculty and be patient. Professors are very busy depending on how many courses they're teaching. Maybe they're, doing a lot of research during that quarter, etc. So general rule of thumb is email 3 times before giving up. Don't email them 3 days in a row asking for the letter, but if they don't respond within a few days, feel free to do a follow-up and just so that the email can go back up to their unread section because it might have gotten lost. It's not unheard of that happens. And if after 3 times they don't respond, go ahead and reach out to someone else. And because you might have to reach out to somebody else, it's always better to ask early rather than later for that letter. But at minimum, we suggest that you ask 30 days before the application you want it to be submitted. So, for example, if you want to submit, for example, the application is due September 15th, the latest you'd want to ask for a letter is maybe mid-June, just so you give the writer enough time to write that good letter. If you rush them, it's not going to be very good. And if you ask too late, they might even say no because they might have other commitments or they might be writing other letters of recommendation and might not have time to do it in 2 weeks. So always ask early. And I mean, if you have someone in mind, you can always ask them when VMCAS opens in January. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to wait until you are going to submit your application. In fact, the letter of rec can be submitted after you submit your application. So never a bad time to ask. And then a common question that pops up is, what if I don't get in this cycle? Can I still use the same letters for when I apply next year? And the answer is yes. You can have the same people write your letters if you still want the same people to write you the letters. The only thing is make sure you let them know and update them on the progress of your application. So if you don't get in, let them know. Tell them, oh, I unfortunately, didn't get in this year, but but I'm applying again next year, and I would love if you could maybe change the date on the letter and submit it again in a year, and then just check in with them when you're going to start your application the next year. Don't leave them high and dry because they're not going to know what's happening. And if you don't let them know that you got in or didn't get in that year, they might not be comfortable writing it, like submitting it again for you the next year. So always keep them updated. Let them know if you got in, let them know if you didn't, let them know if you got waitlisted, etc., just so that they know. All right. So after those sections comes the supporting information section. And this is where you will talk about your experiences. So here you're gonna have to categorize your experiences into one of 6 categories. And the 6 categories are vet, animal, employment, research, volunteer, and extracurricular. And each experience you put in after you categorize it, you're gonna have to come up with a 600 character, this includes spaces, description of your experience. And in that description, you're gonna wanna explain why it's meaningful. And just as a general rundown, veterinary experience is anything that was like clinical or in health science that was under the supervision of a veterinarian. So, for example, if you were a veterinary assistant at a clinic, that would be vet hours. If you worked at Knight's Landing or Mercer, those clinics, that would be vet experience, etc. Animal experience is anything that, relates to working with animals, but that isn't under the supervision of a vet. So a lot of times that's farm and ranch experience, or if you helped out at a shelter with training animals, the Animal Science 49 courses, those internships would count as animal experience. Then there is employment. So that's any paid work done outside of the animal or veterinary field. So for example, any retail or restaurant job. Don't repeat things that you listed under veterinary, animal, or research. So for example, if you were a vet assistant, you were paid like you were an employee, you wouldn't put it under employment, you'd put it under vet experience. And then there's research, that's anything, any animal or veterinary research, as well as any field or lab-based research. So for example, if you did your own project, that's research experience. Then you have volunteer experience. That's anything, again, outside of the animal care field, but was like a volunteer experience. So for example, if you tutored students on the side, or you were working a fundraiser or working a blood drive, etc., that would be a volunteer experience. And the last section is extracurricular. Extracurricular activities are anything you were involved with from high school up until now. So that includes sports, clubs, honor societies, any committees you're a part of, community activities, fraternities, sororities, and any hobbies, etc. Then in that same supporting information section, there's also an achievements portion. And so it looks very similar to the experiences portion. Again, you have 600 characters with spaces to talk about those achievements, and it's categorized by scholarships, awards, and honors. So honors would be things like the dean's list, any quarters you were on the dean's list, I would put that on there. Scholarships, any scholarships you received, I would put that on there. And I would focus on things at the collegiate level, so after high school, for these sections. All right, so if you're asking yourself, what do I write in the explanation for the experience? I need help with that. All right, so we have a simple template that we recommend to students. So we suggest that you spend at most one sentence describing the place where you spent the experience at. You're gonna, like, when you put in your experience, you have to say who your supervisor was, you put the location where you did it, you put your job title, and the amount of time you spent there. So they're gonna know where you spent your time, but if you want to describe the place, then at most use one sentence. Don't spend more than one talking about where you were. And then for the rest of it, we suggest you address these 3 questions. So discuss what your role was and how it contributed to the overall environment of the place. What did you learn from this experience, and why was it important not only to you, but to your road towards going to veterinary school? And how will the skills you developed be beneficial to you as a vet student or as a future veterinarian? And this notice that this applies to all your experiences, not just the ones that are veterinary. So if you were working at Forever 21, for example, you developed a lot of skills there that aren't exactly veterinary, but are applicable to veterinary medicine. For example, you learned how to talk to clients, and you might have had to deal with very different types of clients, which you will do as a veterinarian as well. So that's something you would want to focus on when talking about that experience. Or you might have been the shift manager at McDonald's. So you have leadership experience from that job, even though it's not veterinary. But when you're a veterinarian, you're going to be a leader. So the skills you got as a shift manager can be reflected to veterinary medicine. And then just in general, when you're writing things in the experience, what you want to do is you want to diversify yourself. So you want to talk about different skills that you think others might have not had, that didn't have the same experience. And then schools here are looking more for those soft skills. So the things that aren't exactly taught at school. So that's things like communication, leadership, problem solving, etc. You can talk about some of the technical skills that you learned. So for example, if you learned to place catheter or something like that, you can talk about it, but don't make it the focus of your 600 characters, because the schools are expecting to teach you that when you're in veterinary school. So to them, it's like, okay, well, you have this experience, you still have to learn it in veterinary school. Whereas you might not learn leadership skills in school. So focus on those soft skills when talking about these experiences. Okay, so just to put this into practice, here's an example of an experience description. And this is the initial experience description. And then in the next slide, there's a revised version of this same description, but that is more focused on something the veterinary school might want to see, and it makes better use of your characters. So I'm just going to go ahead and read it out loud. I shadowed veterinarians and veterinary surgical specialists in their daily exams and medical procedures. Two of the most notable procedures I experienced were fixing an ear hematoma and a tibial plateau leveling osteotomy, TPLO. The vet walked me through each step of the ear hematoma and explained to me why he made one stitch over another. The surgeon for the TPLO procedure also walked me through each step and asked me questions based on the anatomy of the animal, determining why he placed a screw where he did. Both of these surgeries fueled my passion for veterinary surgery. Okay, so this description is 587 characters. It didn't go over, which is great, but I want you to notice that in this description, there's too much focus on the surgeons and the two procedures. There's not enough focus on the applicant themselves. So, for example, the first sentence is just a definition of shadowing. Like the reader knows that shadowing means that you are, with a veterinarian and following them through their daily procedures. So you don't need to spend all those characters explaining that. You could simply just say I shadowed veterinarians at this location, etc., and just make it very quick. Don't use too many characters. And then, the rest of this is basically just talking about two procedures. It's not saying anything about the applicant themselves. And none of the soft skills are mentioned here. Essentially, it's just talking about how I saw these two procedures, which is really cool, but doesn't really tell the admissions board why they should take you based on the experience. All right, so this is the revised description from the last one, and I'm going to go ahead and read this out loud. And as I read it out loud, try to think about what is different and why this one might be better over the other one. Working alongside veterinary surgical specialists, I saw multiple procedures such as a tibial plateau leveling osteotomy, TPLO, and was able to make connections between the anatomy of the animal and clinical decisions. I witnessed the need for a strong, clear communication between team members and the significance of manual dexterity in this field. By carefully listening to the instructions given, as I insisted in the operating room, I understood the importance of developing trust and following procedures to ensure the safety of the animal. So this is a little shorter. It's 546 words. Not words, 546 characters. So there could be some things added to this if you wanted to, but notice how it doesn't, like, you have one sentence talking about the procedures that were followed. But then the rest of it is talking about more of those soft skills. So the connections between anatomy of the animal and clinical decisions. Um, it talks about, clear communication between team members and why that is important in the clinic. And then it talks about the importance of trust and, you know, following certain procedures to ensure the safety of the animal. So this tells you a little more about the applicant and what they, learn from this experience and can give to the school, and shows you how they are of value to the school. But yeah. And then if you, again, want assistance on turning this into this, HPA can help you with that. Just come on to drop-ins or come to an appointment, and we can help you get there. All right. So once you've completed most of the application, there comes the program materials. So this is a section that the schools can use for their supplemental applications, so the secondaries, or they can simply just ask extra questions that they'd like you to answer. Some schools also just use it as an agreement, for you to understand that you need to, like, watch out for an email from them or visit their website to complete the supplemental application, in case they don't use VMCAS for that. And so this section currently isn't open. It opens on May 12th when you can start actually selecting the schools. So once that date comes and you actually start picking the schools, this is when you can see the section. So this is what the webpage looks like. Notice that it says no programs are selected yet. But when it comes time to, you can go ahead and start selecting that and see what that looks like. All right, and so talking about program materials, when it comes to your secondaries, can be found on this school's supplemental application, which, as mentioned in the previous slide, can either be on VMCAS or it can be on their own independent website. And so these secondaries are essentially how the schools can get to know more in-depth information about you. So if they don't ask these secondary questions, all they get is your application from VMCAS and then your very general personal statement. But they might, want to know about how you fit into their specific school, or how you demonstrate certain skills that they're specifically looking for. And they're also just this is a place where you can even more talk about how you bring something as an individual to their school. So this is where you are convincing them even more of why you're a good fit. Remember, these essays are about you. And then you are demonstrating your skills, and what you bring to the school with evidence. Same as with your personal statement, you want to have evidence. All right. So some example of essay topics include what do you hope to gain from this program, and how will you use your degree in your profession? How does your background contribute to your decision to become a veterinarian? How will you balance your time in vet school? Why this school specifically, and how do you fit into the environment here? Or how will you contribute to the diversity of our school? These are all questions that have been asked in the past that might be asked in the future. It really just depends on what the school themselves are looking for in that batch of students. So just to give you a better idea of the essay topics, I'm going to include three schools and their secondaries, just to give you an idea of what some of the questions are like. Keep in mind that these questions are subject to change every year. So don't expect this to be the question you have on your secondary. You're applying to these specific schools. These are just to give you an idea of what to expect. All right, so first example is from Davis, and this is from the 2020 cycle, so last year. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's pretty long, but I want the main points of this this question are in bold. So please describe how your personal background informs your decision to pursue a veterinary degree. And then they talk about more specifically what they're looking for. So you can include any educational, familial, cultural, economic, or social experiences, challenges, community service, outreach activities, or opportunities that have been relevant to your academic journey. And then specifically, they want you to consider how your life experiences contribute to the social, intellectual, or cultural diversity within that specific campus, or even within the field itself. And then they also, if you can, they want you to talk about education, how you would serve educationally underrepresented or underserved segments of society with your education. And for the specific question, they give you 2,000 characters. So here, you can essentially talk about anything that you didn't talk about in your personal statement. Don't just repeat what you said in your personal statement. And then, just pick what you want to target out of all this. And then, make sure it's unique to you. Here's another example. This one's from Wisconsin-Madison. And then one of their questions is very similar to what the Davis question was, but they're asking how your background experiences and personal achievements would bring breadth to a class of veterinary medical students and the veterinary medical profession. So again, essentially it's asking about how you would add to the diversity of their school and to the veterinary profession. And they give some examples. So for example, you might consider if you're a first generation student, or if you grew up with financial disadvantage, if you're from a specific cultural or racial group, you can talk about it here. Or if you had a unique volunteer experience, or say you traveled abroad and you worked in Thailand for 6 months. That's unique. That's diverse. Not everyone has that experience, and you have a different perspective due to that. So you can talk about it here. It doesn't just have to be, racial or cultural diversity. But yeah, and then, again, Wisconsin mentioned specifically, they value the educational benefits derived from a diverse student population. And they're committed to creating a community of learners that is broad and diverse. So that's why they're asking you this, because this is part of their mission for their school. So, Wisconsin tells you what their mission is, but, Davis didn't tell you what their mission was. So it's always a good idea to look at the school's mission, and that helps you understand what they're looking for with their supplementals. All right, and the last example is from Cornell, again, from the 2020 cycle, which was last year. And then this one is 5 questions, and they're a little more, you'll notice they look like kind of interview questions, but they're going to be in a written format. So describe a situation in which your actions have had a significant impact on something. Describe a situation where you have learned from your experience. Describe a situation where circumstances were against you and how you made it work for you specifically. Describe a challenge or a problem that you faced in the past and how you reached a solution. And if you had to face this challenge again, would you do anything differently and why? So Cornell, I know, doesn't do interviews, so that might explain why they have these questions on their secondary application. So things to consider. Since they don't do interviews, this is how they're interviewing you essentially with secondaries. Again, these questions almost change every year sometimes, so don't expect this to be what your secondary is, but it can give you an idea of the format some of the schools take. All right. And then this is kind of the last subject when it comes to the application, and it's relevant to the secondaries mostly. But you need to create your vet school list. So you need to decide what schools you're applying to and what schools you would be comfortable going to, and which ones are a good fit for you. And you want to do this not only because you want to go to a school that is a good fit for you. You're going to be there for at least 4 years, so you want to make sure it's something that you're going to be happy with. But by knowing why you want to go to this school, it'll help you convince the schools that you're applying to that you would love to be there. It makes your application a lot stronger, especially when it comes to the secondaries, because if you would love to be there, you would know why. So you would know where for example, where the location is or what their mission is, and you can talk about that in your secondaries or even in your personal statement, and that'll make it a lot stronger, and it'll make your case for wanting to go there a lot better, and the schools will notice this. So how do you create this vet school list, and how once you do create that list, how do you convince the schools that you would love to be there? So number one is making connections. If you can find a student that, went to that school, reach out to them, ask them about their experience, ask them what it's like to be a student there. If you can't find a student, you can always reach out to the school's admissions board. And if they, if they're willing to, they might have a select set of students that are willing to talk to perspectives. And you can ask them questions then. Social media is an excellent thing. A lot of students all over the world have, social media pages dedicated to their vet school experience. So you might be able to find someone that way, potentially. Um, all right. And so we know why it's important to make a vet school list. But how do you make this vet school list? What are the things you should consider when trying to pick a school? So these are some examples of things to consider. It's not, of like the only thing to consider. But just to give you some ideas, so number one is the curriculum model. So schools they're not all the same, they're not all created equal. Some schools have a very traditional curriculum model where it's more lecture based and testing based, whereas other schools have more of a problem based learning curriculum where instead of being in lecture all the time, they focus more on group activities where you do problem based learning. So you might be in a group of 8 and you get handed a case and you have to solve the case based on you know, the physical exam that was conducted on the animal, maybe, knowing the history, etc. And so what you do is, in a problem-based learning situation is you will learn, you will have to focus more on instead of the lecture, you're going to have to find your resources and find the information with publications, maybe even the internet. You might have some lectures, so you use that lecture to help supplement why you think like X, Y, and Z is going on in that case. And those problem-based learning schools focus a lot more on that model, whereas traditional schools, again, focus more on the lecture-based material. Some schools have been trying to do a hybrid version of that, so where they might be more focused on lectures, but they add problem-based learning into their curriculum. So maybe you don't want to do sole problem-based learning, but if you're interested in that, you might want to go to a school that does a hybrid version, just to give you like both perspectives. Again, the two different curriculum models work for different groups of students, so it depends. Something else to consider is special tracks or dual degree programs. So for example, UC Davis has their students track. So you track large animal or small animal. Not all schools do that. A lot of schools you never track, you just learn all species throughout your entire 4 years. And then with dual degree programs is some schools will have a dual DBM MPH program, so that's the Masters of Public Health. They might have a dual DBM MBA degree. Colorado State, for example, has that. Or they might have a dual degree, so a DVM PhD program. If you're, you want your PhD, you might want to look at only schools that offer that dual degree program. All the schools are different. Again, they vary on what they offer. So, visit their admissions pages, visit the school's website to see if they offer these options, and if you're interested in these. Another thing to consider, I think this is super important, is geographic location. So you want to make sure to research where this school is. Is it in a city? Is it in a rural location? How far, like, how much do you care about visiting your family? If you, want to visit at least once a month, are you comfortable with a 8-hour flight? Or do you want to be closer? There's the weather. So are you strictly against, like, snow? If you are strictly against ever living anywhere in the snow, don't apply to the schools that have heavy snow seasons. If you really like hiking, you might want to go to a school that has hiking trails nearby, etc. Another thing to consider is the student organizations that are available at that school. So for example, if you want to participate in a free student-run clinic, I would look into that, see if that's the school offers that. Because again, not all schools have the same things. If you're interested in, owning your own practice, you might want to go to a school that offers a VBMA club, etc. And then even within that, just look like, you might be able to ask students about, how much time do you have to participate in these clubs? Do you even have time to do this? Based on how the curriculum is set up, etc. And then one of the last things is research. So if you want to do research, you're going to want to go to a school that has research opportunities for you to participate in, etc. And then where do you find this information? So, just dig deep on the websites. Don't just stay on the admissions page. The admissions page is, for the focused on admissions and getting you into the school and letting you know how to get in. But the rest of the website for the school will talk about, all the things that are involved. So they might talk about, recent research that their faculty have done. They might talk about, we have the mountains nearby an hour away or something. They might talk about their curriculum, and they might talk about their student organizations. Some schools even have like video tours of the school, and they might even have like student interviews as well. So definitely don't just stick to the admissions pages. Look at the entire website for the school. All right. Okay, so that is the end of our presentation. Here at the end, I just wanted to give you guys an idea of some of the resources that are available to help you through your application process. So number one is the VMCAS Help Center. So you notice in the red circle, that's the link when you get to the VMCAS sign-in page. You can access the Help Center through there, and the Help Center looks like this. And it, like almost any question you will have about the application, you can ask here. They even have a guide on how to start the application, and then it goes through all the different sections and helps you fill it out, especially for those like technical questions like what can be included as animal versus what can be vet experience, or even like what classes are counted in the science GPA versus which ones aren't. And then they have this new feature. Now I've never used it, but they have this live chat feature that you can click on and ask some of your questions if you want quicker responses. But besides that, you can also notice there that they have the click here to contact us by phone or email. They have a phone number, and they have an email that you can send your questions to as well. All right, the next resource you have is VMCAS actually hosts a series of webinars for their applicants. So the director of VMCAS actually does presentations on the VMCAS process for applicants. It's directed towards you guys, and answers questions via live chat through these webinars. These are recorded, so if you wanted to, you could look into these after if you can't attend these dates. But the two dates for this next 2 months are April 21st and May 10th. And I will include the link in the description of this video for the events page for the AAVMC. And once you get to that page, you can register for these webinars if you'd like, or you can watch the recording of a previous one. All right, another resource is the AAVMC actually has this like comprehensive list from all the institutions about any provisional changes they have made to their admissions policy due to the pandemic. So as far as when I checked, they last updated it on August 21st of 2020. And it goes over things like, if they accept online lab work, if they accept pass or no pass coursework for prerequisites, if they're relaxing their experience hours, if they're relaxing their GRE requirement, etc. And they even include a link to the specific school's admissions website that has like an FAQ or like an announcement about any changes due to the pandemic. It's a really good list just to, just have this link and check it periodically to see if there's any changes to the school you're applying to. And again, I'll include the link in the description. And here it is too. Free to look at. You can also just Google AAVMC COVID-19, and this is the first link that pops up. All right, and then the last resource I wanted to make you all aware about is the Veterinary Medical Admissions Virtual Fair. It's going on March 31st. So this is a free virtual admissions fair where you get the opportunity to chat with a bunch of different veterinary school admissions officers from all over the world. So you can get your questions answered about program requirements, the VMCAS application. You can ask them specific questions about like maybe their curriculum or what's available at their school about like for student organizations, etc. And then VMCAS representatives themselves will also be available to answer any application related questions. So this fair is on March 31st from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. Pacific time. You do have to register. Again, if you go to the AVMC events page link that's going to be in the description, you can register there. And I highly recommend you attend this because not everyone gets the opportunity to do this. So I definitely suggest attending if you can. And they probably will have an itinerary of events now that the event is closer. So you might not have to attend 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. You can just attend to the ones you're interested in. And again, the link will be in the description. All right. So I hope this webinar was of use to you. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact HPA. We're all available to answer your questions. Hope you have a great day.